My son's words cut deeper than any bullet I took in Afghanistan. You're not welcome at our Easter table. My own flesh and blood, spitting in the face of every sacrifice I made, hundreds of thousands of dollars, my pension, my dreams, all poured into their perfect Vernon home. They called me a washed-up veteran, too low class for their fancy dinner. The betrayal burned, a pain so raw it crushed my soul. I staggered to my truck, hands shaking, and made one call to cancel their mortgage payment. They thought they could erase me. They're dead wrong. Stay tuned, you'll see their world collapse. The sting of my son's words still burned as I sat in Ethan's Vernon living room, the scent of maple-glazed ham wafting from their kitchen. I'm James McDonald, a 62-year-old Canadian veteran who survived Afghanistan, but this betrayal felt like a wound no metal could heal. For 6 years, I'd poured $3,500 a month from my military pension into their mortgage, $252,000 total, plus a $50,000 down payment for their cozy bungalow on Okanagan Lake. My own apartment? A cramped 600-square-foot box with a leaking faucet I couldn't afford to fix. I leaned forward on their plush leather sofa, trying to bridge the gap. Ethan, I could make Nana's hot cross buns for Easter. You know, the ones with the orange zest she loved. Ethan shifted, avoiding my eyes, his wedding ring glinting under their chandelier. Dad, Sophie's folks are coming from Vancouver. They'd prefer a different vibe this year. His voice trailed off, weak. Sophie swept in. Herr Designer ska fluttering. James, let's be honest. You're a bit rough around the edges for our guests. Easter's about sophistication, you know? Not war stories or small-town talk. My chest tightened, like I was back in Kandahar under fire. I'd rebuilt their lives while living on canned soup, and now I was rough? So, I'm not welcome? I asked, voice low. Ethan mumbled, "It's just easier this way, Dad." Easier. That word shattered something inside me. I stood, the room spinning, and walked out into the Vernon dusk, their rejection echoing louder than any battlefield explosion. What came next would shake their world. The Vernon dusk wrapped around me like a cold shroud as I climbed into my truck. Ethan's words, "It's just easier this way, Dad," cutting deeper with every heartbeat. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I drove past the glowing bungalows along Okanagan Lake, each one a reminder of the life I'd given up. For 6 years, I'd funneled $3,500 a month from my military pension into Ethan and Sophie's mortgage, a total of $252,000, not counting the $50,000 down payment I scraped together from my savings when they bought their dream home. That house, with its cedar deck and floor-to-ceiling windows, was my sacrifice, every nail, every shingle, paid for with my sweat. Back in my 600-square-foot apartment, the faucet dripped, a mocking rhythm against the chipped sink I couldn't afford to replace. I'd stopped buying new clothes 3 years ago, wearing the same faded Canucks hoodie through Vernon's bitter winters. Meanwhile, Sophie's Instagram flaunted their renovated kitchen, with its $8,000 quartz countertops I'd covered when Ethan lost his job. Essential for entertaining, she'd called it, while I ate instant noodles to make ends meet. Their living room, with its IKEA sectional and smart television, screamed my generosity, yet they'd branded me rough around the edges, unfit for their Easter table. I sank into my worn recliner, the springs creaking under me, and stared at the wall where a faded photo of my late wife, Emma, hung. She'd have been heartbroken to see Ethan turn his back on me. "You always give too much," she'd said once, her voice soft as Okanagan summer rain. I gave everything $10,000 for their hot tub, $5,000 for their kids' hockey gear, even $2,000 for Sophie's must-have espresso machine that sat unused after a week. My pension, meant for a quiet retirement, maybe a fishing cabin by Kalamalka Lake, was gone, bled dry by their endless needs. Last spring, when Sophie wanted a new patio for summer barbecues, I took out a $15,000 loan against my truck. "You're the best, Dad," Ethan had said, clapping my shoulder, but Sophie just nodded, her eyes scanning me like I was hired help. At their housewarming, she'd bragged about our hard work to her Vancouver friends, never mentioning the veteran who'd bankrolled it all. I stood in their backyard holding a cheap beer, while her parents, Robert and Margaret, whispered about my small-town ways and war stories that didn't fit their polished conversation about wine tours and stock markets. "Why do you keep doing this, James?" my buddy Tom asked at the Royal Canadian Legion last month, his voice heavy over a pint of Molson. "They're using you." I brushed it off then, but now, sitting alone, Ethan's rejection replayed like a grenade blast. "A different vibe," he'd said. Sophie's words were worse. "You're a bit rough." Rough? I'd carried shrapnel in my leg for a decade, fought for my country, built a life for my son, and they saw me as an embarrassment? The anger boiled, but beneath it, a deeper pain gnawed. My own son had chosen his wife's snooty family over me. I pulled out my bank statements, the numbers screaming betrayal. $302,000 total, every cent a piece of my soul. My life, reduced to a balance sheet for a house where I wasn't welcome. I slammed the papers down, the sound echoing in my empty apartment. Something snapped inside me, not just anger, but a resolve as hard as the Afghan desert. They thought they could discard me like an old uniform. They were about to learn what happens when a veteran fights back. The weight of Ethan's betrayal clung to me like damp Vernon fog as I sat alone in my dim apartment. The bank statements still scattered across my coffee table. Each number $3,500 a month, $252,000 over 6 years, $50,000 for their down payment was a scar, proof of a life poured into a family that now saw me as garbage. My gaze fell on the small wooden box on my shelf, where I kept my Afghanistan service medals. I hadn't opened it in years, but tonight, the pain drove me to it. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid, the glint of the Canadian Forces decoration catching the weak light. I'd earned that medal in Kandahar, dragging a wounded comrade through a hail of bullets, promising myself I'd survive for my family, for Ethan, for Emma. I clutched the medal, its cold metal biting into my palm, and memories flooded back. Afghanistan, 2007. A roadside bomb had torn through our convoy, the air thick with dust and screams. I'd carried Private Leclerc 2 kilometers to safety, my legs shredded by shrapnel, my heart pounding with one thought: get home to my son. I'd whispered Ethan's name like a prayer, picturing his 6-year-old smile, his tiny hand in mine at the Calgary Stampede. That promise kept me alive. But now, Ethan's voice: "It's just easier this way, Dad," stabbed deeper than any shrapnel. My sacrifice, my scars, meant nothing to him. I stumbled to the closet, pulling out a shoebox of Emma's things. Her scent, lavender and cedar, still lingered in the folded letters. One caught my eye, her neat handwriting blurred by my tears. "James, you're our rock. Keep Ethan close, no matter what." Emma wrote that before cancer took her, 9 years ago, when Ethan was still my boy, not Sophie's puppet. I'd honored her wish, giving everything: $15,000 for their patio, $8,000 for their kitchen, $2,000 for that damned espresso machine to keep Ethan's life stable. But he'd traded me for Sophie's Vancouver parents, Robert and Margaret, with their fancy degrees and Whistler ski trips. I was just a Vernon grunt to them, a relic of war they'd rather forget. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, the letter crumpling in my hand. "Emma, I failed you," I whispered, my voice breaking. I'd fought for our country, for our son, only to be erased from his life. The pain was a living thing, clawing at my chest, worse than the night I'd held Emma's hand as she slipped away. At least then, I'd had hope that Ethan and I would face the world together. Now, that hope was ash. Sophie's words echoed, "You're a bit rough." Rough? I'd rebuilt their lives while my own crumbled. My apartment's peeling wallpaper mocking my $600 rent. My fridge stocked with discount no-name cans because every dollar went to their Okanagan Lake view. I dragged myself to the window, staring at Vernon's quiet streets, where families were planning Easter egg hunts and church suppers. I'd imagined joining Ethan's kids for those, teaching them to carve maple leaf patterns like Emma did. But Sophie's sneer, not war stories or small-town talk, had stolen that too. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Dad, let's talk after Easter. Maybe Victoria Day?" After Easter. Like I was a chore to pencil in. I hurled the phone across the room, the crack against the wall echoing my rage. I wasn't just unwanted. I was invisible. The medals, the letters, the bank statements, they all screamed the same truth. I'd given my soul to a family that spat on it. My chest heaved, tears mixing with fury. I'd faced death in Afghanistan. But this betrayal was a wound no battlefield could prepare me for. I stood, fists clenched, the pain forging something new, a resolve to stop bleeding for them. They'd learn what happens when you break a veteran's heart. The pain in my chest burned like a live grenade, but something else was rising, a steel resolve forged in the ashes of Ethan's betrayal. I sat in my Vernon apartment, the crumpled letter from Emma still in my hand, her words, "Keep Ethan close," now a bitter echo. My phone lay cracked in the corner where I'd thrown it. Ethan's text, "Dad, let's talk after Easter." A final insult. After Easter. Like I was a spare tire to be stored until convenient. I stood, my boots heavy on the worn linoleum, and faced the mirror. My reflection showed a man who'd survived Kandahar, who'd carried men through fire, not the rough veteran Sophie sneered at. "No more," I growled, my voice low, steady, like the calm before a storm. I pulled the bank statements from the coffee table, the numbers glaring like battle scars. $3,500 a month for 6 years, $250, $2,000 total, plus the $50, 000, down payment for Ethan and Sophie's Okanagan Lake bungalow. Add in the $15,000 patio loan, $8,000 for their quartz countertops, $5,000 for their kids' hockey gear, $2,000 for Sophie's espresso machine, a staggering $332,000, more than my entire military pension. I'd given up my dream of a fishing cabin by Kalamalka Lake, skipped doctor visits to save cash, lived on no-name soup while their house glowed with my sacrifice. And for what? To be told I didn't fit their sophisticated Easter vibe. I grabbed my old army jacket from the closet, the one I wore when I got my Canadian Forces decoration. It still smelled of desert dust, a reminder of the man who didn't break. "You're a soldier, James," I told myself, zipping it up. "Soldiers don't beg for scraps." My hands shook not with fear, but with a fury that felt like coming alive. I picked up my phone, ignoring the cracked screen, and dialed my bank. The automated system droned in English and French, as Canadian as maple syrup, until Jennifer's voice cut through. "Customer service, how can I help you?" "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said, my voice hard as granite. "Account ending in 4,192, $3,500 monthly to Ethan McDonald's mortgage." Jennifer paused, her keyboard clicking. "Sir, that's been running for 6 years. Are you sure?" I looked around my apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the flickering bulb I couldn't replace because every cent went to Ethan's life. "I've never been surer," I replied. "Cancel it. Effective immediately." Her voice softened, like she sensed the weight of it. "Done, Mr. McDonald. Anything else?" "No," I said, a strange calm settling over me. That's everything. I hung up and stood in the silence, the Vernon night pressing against my windows. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, like shedding a rucksack after a 20-kilometer march. I opened my laptop and pulled up the mortgage documents, every payment logged like a war diary. $332,000. I'd sold my future for their comfort, and they'd repaid me with a locked door. Sophie's voice rang in my head. "You're a bit rough." Ethan's weak excuse. "It's just easier." Easier for who? Not for the man who'd eaten stale bread to keep their lights on. I walked to my desk, pulling out a manila folder. Inside were receipts, bank records, even a photo of their house from the day they moved in, Ethan smiling, Sophie waving, me in the background, invisible. I spread them out, my hands steady now. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about the veteran who'd fought for his country and his son, only to be cast aside. I'd given them everything. Now, I'd take it back. My phone buzzed again, Sophie this time. "James, can you pick up my parents from Kelowna Airport tomorrow? Flight 2:2 p.m. The audacity hit like a slap. Not even a please, just another order from the Queen of Okanagan Lake. I stared at the message, my jaw tight. "No," I whispered to the empty room. "Not this time." I set the phone down and looked at the folder. Easter was coming, and so was their reckoning. They thought they could bury me. They were about to face a soldier who'd learned to fight back. The Vernon evening was crisp, the Okanagan Lake shimmering under a pale moon as I parked my truck across from Ethan and Sophie's bungalow. Easter Sunday had arrived, and their house glowed with warm light, laughter spilling from the open windows. Inside, Sophie played the perfect hostess, her voice carrying over the clink of wine glasses, boasting about our beautiful home to a dozen guests, her parents, Robert and Margaret, and their Vancouver elite friends. I clutched my manila folder, stuffed with 6 years of bank statements, receipts, and mortgage records, $332,000 of my blood and sweat. My old army jacket felt like armor as I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a battlefield, and I was done being invisible. I pushed open the unlocked front door, the scent of maple-glazed ham and hot cross buns hitting me like a memory of Emma's kitchen. The dining room buzzed with chatter, crystal chandeliers casting light on Sophie's $8,000 quartz countertops. I stood in the doorway, folder in hand, as 12 faces turned to me, their smiles freezing. Sophie's wine glass trembled mid-air. "James, what are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice sharp as a bayonet. Ethan's face paled, his fork clattering to the plate. Robert, in a tailored blazer, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is a private gathering," he said, voice dripping with disdain. I stepped forward, my voice steady as a sniper's aim. "Private? Funny, considering I paid for every inch of this house." Gasps rippled through the room. I opened the folder and began placing stacks of documents before each guest bank statement showing $3,500 monthly transfers, $50,000 for the down payment, $15,000 for the patio, $5,000 for hockey gear. "This is $332,000 of my military pension," I said, my words cutting through the silence. "Money I gave so Ethan and Sophie could have this life. But I'm not welcome at your Easter table because I'm too rough." Sophie's face flushed red. "James, this is inappropriate. You need to leave now." Her mother, Margaret, adjusted her pearls, her voice icy. "This is highly irregular. You're embarrassing yourself." I locked eyes with her. "Embarrassing? Like how you called my war stories small-town talk, or how you said I didn't fit your sophisticated vibe." I turned to the guests, some clutching my documents, their eyes wide. They took my money for 6 years, lived in this house I paid for, then banned me from Easter because I'm just a Vernon veteran, not good enough for their Vancouver crowd. A woman in a silk dress, likely one of Margaret's charity friends, spoke up, her voice trembling. "Sophie, is this true?" Sophie stammered. "It's complicated. James offered to help. We never asked." I slammed a receipt on the table, $2,000 for her espresso machine. "Offered? You begged for this when Ethan was unemployed. I ate no-name soup to keep your lights on." Ethan's head dropped, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I didn't mean—" But I cut him off, pointing at the folder. "You let your wife and her parents treat me like dirt while I bankrolled your life." The room was a graveyard of silence, the guests' faces shifting from shock to disgust. Robert stood, his voice booming. "You're out of line, McDonald. This is our daughter's home." I stepped closer, my voice low, dangerous. "Your daughter's home? I paid $250,000 in mortgage payments alone. Where were you when they needed a down payment?" A man in a tweed jacket flipped through the documents, muttering, "This is unbelievable." Another guest, an older woman, glared at Sophie. "You took his money and excluded him? That's shameful." Sophie's composure cracked, her eyes darting to Ethan, who sat frozen. Margaret tried to rally. "This is a misunderstanding. James, you're blowing this out of proportion." I held up a photo from their housewarming, me in the background, ignored. "Proportion? You built your perfect life on my sacrifice, then told me I wasn't good enough to share it." The guests murmured, some shaking their heads. I straightened, my army jacket creaking. "Enjoy your Easter dinner," I said, turning for the door. "It's the last one I'm paying for." As I stepped into the Vernon night, their stunned silence was sweeter than any maple syrup. But the war wasn't over yet. The echo of my Easter confrontation still rang in my ears as I sat in my Vernon apartment, the Okanagan morning sun filtering through my cracked blinds. I'd left Ethan and Sophie's dinner in ruins, their guests clutching my bank statements, their perfect facade shattered. For a moment, I thought I'd won, taken back my dignity, shown them what a veteran's resolve looked like. But 3 days later, on a chilly Wednesday, I grabbed my copy of the Vernon Morning Star from the porch, expecting local hockey scores. Instead, my own face stared back from page 4 under a headline that hit like a mortar round. "Local veteran abandons family at Easter, sparks concern for mental stability." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. The article, penned by one Patricia Langley, painted me as a deranged ex-soldier who'd stormed Ethan's Easter dinner, harassing Sophie's family and endangering their guests with erratic behavior. It claimed I'd refused to pick up Robert and Margaret from Kelowna Airport, leaving them stranded in near-freezing conditions. Near freezing? It was 12 degrees Celsius that day, sunny as a July afternoon on Okanagan Lake. No mention of my $332,000 in payments, $252,000 for their mortgage, $50,000 down payment, $15,000 for their patio, $8, zero for quartz countertops, zero for hockey gear, zero for Sophie's espresso machine. No hint of their betrayal, their sneers about my small-town talk or rough ways. Just me, the unhinged veteran, a danger to Vernon's polite society. My hands shook, not with fear but with a fury that burned hotter than Kandahar's desert sun. Robert, the retired bank executive with Whistler connections, had played his card. I could see him now, sipping scotch at the Vernon Golf Club, pulling strings with his old business cronies to plant this hit piece. Patricia Langley, the byline, was no stranger. She'd covered Robert's charity galas, her LinkedIn tied to his network through a mutual friend at the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce. This wasn't journalism. It was a calculated strike to bury my reputation in a town where I'd coached kids hockey, volunteered at the Royal Canadian Legion, built a life. I slammed the paper down, the sound sharp in my quiet apartment. My phone buzzed Sophie, no doubt ready to gloat. "James, you've gone too far," her voicemail hissed. My parents are respected people. You can't just humiliate us and expect no consequences. Consequences? I'd spent 6 years eating no-name soup to fund their Okanagan lake view, and now I was the villain? I paced the room, my old army boots thudding against the linoleum, each step fueling a plan. They thought they could ruin me in Vernon's eyes, turn my service into a punchline. They didn't know who they were fighting. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying over the keys as I dug into their digital lives. Sophie's Instagram was a shrine to their hard-earned lifestyle photos of their cedar deck, their kids' $200 CCM skates, their Easter table with maple-glazed ham, all paid for by me. Robert's Facebook boasted about his community leadership, no mention of the veteran he'd slandered. I pulled up my bank records. Every $3,500 transfer a bullet in my arsenal. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to expose them. My old army buddy Tom had a friend at a local radio station, CJIB. "James, you need to fight back," he'd said over a Molson at the Legion. "Tell your story." I started typing, drafting a post for the Vernon Community Facebook group, 5,000 members strong. "This is James McDonald, veteran," I wrote. The Morning Star called me unhinged. Here's the truth. $332,000 of my pension built my son's house, and they banned me from Easter for being too rough. Read the receipts. I attached scans of my bank statements, the $50,000 down payment, the $15,000 loan. My cursor hovered over post. This wasn't just about clearing my name, it was about showing Vernon what happens when you cross a soldier who's done bleeding. I hit send, my heart pounding like it did before a mission. The fight was public now, and they'd regret starting it. The Vernon air felt lighter as I sipped my coffee, the morning sun painting Okanagan Lake in hues of gold. My Facebook post had exploded over 2,000 shares in the Vernon community group, my bank statements and receipts exposing Ethan and Sophie's betrayal to thousands. Comments flooded in. "Disgraceful," wrote a Legion buddy. "You're a hero, James," said a stranger. The Vernon Morning Star article, Robert's calculated strike, had backfired. Vernon knew the truth. I'd paid $332,000, $250,000 in mortgage payments, $50,000 down payment, $15,000 for their patio, $8,000 for quartz countertops, $5,000 for hockey gear, $2,000 for Sophie's espresso machine, only to be banned from their Easter table for being too rough. The town's respect, built through years of coaching kids hockey and volunteering at the Royal Canadian Legion, was mine again. 2 weeks after Easter, a certified letter arrived at my apartment, the paper heavy with consequences. "Notice of default," it read, detailing $10,500 in overdue mortgage payments for Ethan and Sophie's bungalow. The bank was moving to foreclose. I set the letter down, its words as distant as a weather report from Winnipeg. My phone buzzed relentlessly, Sophie's number, blocked after her venomous voicemails. Robert and Margaret, their social standing crumbling after my public post, had gone silent, their Whistler crowd no longer inviting them to wine tastings. Ethan's texts piled up, each one more desperate. "Dad, we're losing everything. Please call." I let them sit unanswered, like unexploded ordnance. Then, one rainy May evening, a knock rattled my door. I opened it to find Ethan, his face gaunt, his $500 North Face jacket soaked through. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade since Easter, dark circles under his eyes, his confidence drowned in the Okanagan spring. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him into my apartment, now brighter with new paint I'd afforded since canceling their mortgage. He glanced at my refurbished recliner, the fixed faucet, signs of a life no longer bled dry. "Nice place," he mumbled, perching on my couch like he feared it might bite. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan said, his hands twisting together. For Easter, for Sophie's parents, for everything. I let them control me. His eyes met mine, pleading. I didn't know about the newspaper article. Robert set it up. He said it'd teach you a lesson. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. A lesson? Like how you learned to call me rough while I paid $332,000 for your life? Ethan flinched, his voice barely a whisper. I was weak. Sophie's family, they made me think you were less. Less. The word stung, but I'd heard worse in Kandahar. What do you want, Ethan? I asked, leaning back in my chair. He swallowed hard. The house is in foreclosure. We can't pay the $10,500. Sophie's a mess. Her parents won't help. I don't know what to do. His eyes welled up, but I held firm, my heart no longer his to break. You chose them over me, I said, my voice calm but cold. You let Sophie and her parents spit on my service, my sacrifice, while I ate no-name soup to keep your lights on. Ethan's head dropped. I know, Dad, I ruined everything. I stood, walking to the window, the Vernon rain streaking the glass like tears I'd already shed. You didn't ruin me, Ethan. You ruined yourself. I turned to him. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. You'll figure this out, sell the house, get a job, live within your means. He nodded, tears falling, and stood to leave. I'm proud of you, Dad, he whispered, for standing up at Easter, for fighting back. I said nothing, watching him step into the rain, a broken man learning what I'd learned in Afghanistan. Survival demands strength. That night, I drove to the Royal Canadian Legion, joining my old squad for a belated Easter supper, moose stew and Molson, laughter filling the air. For the first time in years, I felt home, surrounded by brothers who valued me, not my wallet. The weight of $332,000 was gone, replaced by a freedom as vast as Okanagan Lake. Their foreclosure wasn't my burden anymore. I was James McDonald, veteran, and I was done fighting battles for those who didn't deserve me. The Vernon summer sun dipped low over Okanagan Lake, casting a warm glow through my apartment window. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, like a soldier who'd laid down his pack after a long march. The foreclosure notice on Ethan and Sophie's bungalow, $10,500 in unpaid mortgage payments, sat on my desk, a relic of a battle I'd finally walked away from. My $332,000 in sacrifices, $252,000 in monthly payments, $50,000 down payment, $15,000 for their patio, $8,000 for quartz countertops, $5,000 for hockey gear, $2,000 for Sophie's espresso machine was no longer my chain to carry. Ethan's tearful apology, his rain-soaked figure at my door, lingered in my mind. I'm proud of you, Dad, he'd said, but I'd learned pride wasn't enough to rebuild what was broken. I poured a glass of Okanagan Valley Merlot, the kind Emma loved, and stepped onto my balcony. The lake sparkled, a reminder of the life I was reclaiming. I'd spent 6 years eating no-name soup, wearing a faded Canucks hoodie, living in a 600-square-foot apartment with a leaking faucet to fund Ethan's dream. Sophie's sneers, too rough, and Robert and Margaret's Vernon Morning Star hit piece had tried to bury me. But Vernon saw the truth. My Facebook post, with its bank statements and receipts, had spread like wildfire, shared 2,000 times, restoring my name among the Legion brothers and hockey parents who knew the real James McDonald. Robert's Whistler connections couldn't save his reputation. Their social circle had turned cold, their charity galas unattended. I thought of Emma, her letter still tucked in the shoebox, urging me to keep Ethan close. I'd tried, but love doesn't mean letting others trample you. In Afghanistan, I'd learned to fight for what mattered: my country, my men, my survival. Here, in Vernon, I'd fought for my dignity. That fight taught me a lesson harder than any battlefield. Your worth isn't tied to what you give others, but to what you keep for yourself. I'd given Ethan everything, $332,000, my dreams of a Kalamalka Lake cabin, my health only to be called small town and rough. No more. I was a veteran, a man who'd faced death and deserved respect, not scraps. Last weekend, I joined my Legion buddies for a barbecue, the air thick with laughter and the smell of grilled moose burgers. Tom, my old squad mate, raised a Molson and said, "You're back, James, the real you." He was right. I'd signed up to volunteer at the Legion's Remembrance Day ceremony, teaching kids about sacrifice, not just in war but in life. My apartment, now with fresh paint and a fixed faucet, felt like a home again, not a prison. I'd even booked a fishing trip to Shoe Swap Lake, something I hadn't done since Emma passed. The future stretched before me, as wide and free as the Okanagan horizon. Ethan would find his way, or he wouldn't. His foreclosure, his fractured marriage to Sophie, their fall from Vernon's social ladder, those were his battles now. I'd forgiven him, but forgiveness didn't mean funding his mistakes. I'd learned to fight for myself, to stand tall like I did in Kandahar, not for applause but for the man in the mirror. If I could face bullets, I could face a son's betrayal and come out stronger. I raised my glass to the lake, to Emma's memory, to the veteran who'd reclaimed his life. If you've ever been pushed aside, told you're not enough, know this: your worth is yours to defend. Don't let anyone steal it. If this story hit you, if you fought your own battles, drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us on Maple Revenge. Let's keep telling stories of standing tall together.